Good morning. This is Paul, Department of Social Work, College of Staten Island, and just building off of the video that we just watched, right? So this is where you just get to understand why we have come together. So on the screen, there's a depiction from the Staten Island Advance, and really focus on the Willowbrook announcement that says "Inside the Cages." Also on the screen is a illustration of "I Can't Breathe," Eric Garner, July 12, 2014. So when you think of the islands, which is where we are, what our focus, what our support has been around, is that islands in general have a history of being used to really exploit and isolate marginalized people. In fact, if you begin to think about it, the bridges and the tunnels really set a stage for really keeping people separate, allowing people to use what we call this unoccupied land, right? So by framing this historical context, we begin to look at the practices, the policies, the structures, and the institutions that really add to the disenfranchising of stigmatized populations. So that's really how we want to focus this. Next slide. So as you begin to think about that, right, I want you to think of the fundamental question that we really was focused on is who belongs, right? That's the big question. Who belongs, and who belongs specifically, we're saying, in the island. This is really an acute question that's being asked across the globe, right? It's a question, matters of identity really divide societies, right? We're divided by religion, ethnicity, skin color, age, sexual orientation, race, and other identities in politics. So a lot of this separation is what we're really looking at. So when you think of this in terms of belonging, the Othering and Belonging Institute, which also gave us this great film that we just watched prior, really, they developed what's called this Inclusiveness Index. And this index has 6 domains. And we have 3 on the screen right now. It has income inequality, outgroup violence, political representation. So when you look at income inequality, as far as that now, you think of the disparities, right? That's across the island between North Shore and South Shore. When you think of outgroup violence, you think Staten Island in 2020, the numbers of hate crime increased as opposed to across the other boroughs. And that, if you look at that data, is prior to the anti-Asian hate crimes that's been happening. And then when you look at political representation, right, in the past 50 years, Staten Island has elected maybe we had one top Black politician, Debbie Rose, and we just added Charles Full. So you can see that even in political representation, there's some disparities. Next slide. The other part of that index is immigration policies and practices. You have anti-discrimination laws and rates of arrest and incarceration. And so you really begin to use these indexes to determine, you can look at the space that you're in using these 6 areas to see how are people being fared on the island. Next slide. So if you begin to look at that, that leads us to, okay, instead of saying that we're having all these issues, these problems, what this work did was we wanted to focus on opportunity. What is the opportunity that we have? Well, Staten Island itself, we have a lot of constellation of human services and advocacy groups that are really working hard, have a lot of efforts going on. So we don't want people to think that we've ignored those efforts. But there's also been a great shift in race and ethnicity. In fact, the diversity index shows that Staten Island's diversity is increasing higher than any other borough. But based on that increase and the work that's being happening, there's also this level of distrust. Some of the questions and the statements are, who are you? Who are you to come into my neighborhood and tell me that we need all these changes? Who are you to tell me that I need help? These are some of the questions that we wanted to really begin to address. So what happened is we said that we need a space to come together to really collaborate, to cultivate partnership, to foster belonging, and begin to undo some of the harms that's been impacting people who have been marginalized on an island. So our big question is, what can we do together that we cannot do alone? And so we really want to acknowledge everybody on Staten Island, but we also want to acknowledge the fact that there's a level of distrust, and that's why we begin the process. Next slide, Myra.
Yes, thank you for giving us a great segue into the questions that really moved our project forward. And I think that's really important to say, because with these questions, we are so grateful that we ask these questions to local community leaders and local community residents, and from students to small businesses to human service directors to clients who are at agencies, to generously tell us, you know, what can we do together that we cannot do alone? And, you know, what spaces exist where we could look at and see how that work is happening. And people generously shared their insights and experiences with our planning team. And everyone that you'll see speaking today, myself, Myra Humphreys, Paul Archibald, Alexa Donnelly, Fran, who spoke earlier, Linda, everyone that you're going to hear speaking today is part of our planning team that for over the last year has given their time and committed to hosting and facilitating a space for our community of practice. So you're getting to know our team as well. And so we're grateful also, we cannot say enough to CSI and the Department of Social Work and the Rivera Fund, the Rivera Fund for Social Work and Disability Studies, that and also we had a small grant from the Council of Social Work Education that these resources and supports from the college and from other spaces have really helped us to sponsor the Staten Island Equity and Belonging Project. Now, we began this project, and we just want to tell you a story about the project. We began by inviting community members to inform the development of a Staten Island Equity and Belonging survey. We wanted to do a survey because we wanted to get a sense of what were people's beliefs on Staten Island about equity and belonging. And so we developed the poll and the survey. We asked people for input from different community groups to help us to build it. It is a borough-wide poll. And if Jenna, you can put the link for the poll in the chat, because there's still opportunities if you haven't completed the survey to still join us in participating. And the survey is to better understand the attitudes, the perceptions, and the awareness that Staten Island residents have about aspects of equity and community belonging. And to date, I'm really happy to say that we've collected over 1,500 surveys from residents and employees who work and live on the island. And we're really wanting to get to 2,000. That is like our target for a convenience sample. And any help with that, we would love to partner with community groups and with folks who think that they can get a diverse set of folks filling out the survey. And the reason why we want the survey to have a complete representation from across the island in every zip code, and we check every week to see that that's happening, is because the results are not just about simply writing up a research project and publishing an article, but the results are really for the Staten Island community. We want to be able to use the results of the survey to circulate it and make it widely available for Staten Island organizations, businesses, community groups to review and integrate in different ways, whether it's into their strategic planning, into their cultural shift planning, program development, staff training, advocacy efforts, funding development. We want people to see these as a resource for understanding people's views and experiences about belonging and equity on the island. Also, the borough-wide survey, along with it, we initiated the Public Conversations for Change Leadership Fellows, which you are here with us today. And the fellowship was designed tell you a little bit about the story of it as a community of practice. A community of practice simply means that a broad range of diverse folks from across the island came together to practice different ways of being together. And the people who have come together, most of us did not know each other, from self-advocates to college students to nonprofit leaders to neighborhood activists to small business owners, human service professionals, educators, academics. We all came together to cultivate a space for civic dialogue, where ideas, where knowledge, where experiences, resources could come together, and we could then create a meta-narrative, if you will, a shared language, a common agenda for fostering, equity and belonging on Staten Island. And so, guided by these principles, we are wiser together, that we are more knowledgeable together, that we are better resourced together. We made an open invitation for diverse community leaders to participate in the Pcclf. And these invitations were made through a lot of grassroots efforts. We did everything from, recruiting at local nonprofits, small businesses, through our field supervisors, advocacy networks, word of mouth. We also used a lot of local Staten Island social media forums to invite folks into the fellowship. And so in the first year of the Pcclf fellowship, this is our first year doing it, and I'm happy to say that we've had approximately 75 people who have participated. And we want to emphasize that more importantly is the process of the Pcclf. And the process is really what has made it unique. This is a process that places relationship building at the center of transformative justice and community accountability. And I don't know about you, but I know as we are in this tumultuous time with so many different things that are happening, from, the trial of George Floyd's murderer to, insurrection happening at the Capitol to, violence towards Asian Americans. There's been a lot, a pandemic. There's been a lot this year that has created a lot of punctuated change and immediacy, that people are thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion work and wanting to do better. And it's not uncommon that when organizations want to do better, that we go directly to, we can move to the next slide, that we move directly to thinking about operationalizing our processes. We go to structure, we go to figuring out how do we operationalize a process. And in that, we sometimes start focusing on metrics and accountability and mandates. And these are important things. They're just not the only things. And so we get focused on how many people do we need to get involved with blank? Did we get blank people involved with it? Are we making sure that our inclusion is including blank? And so it can become entirely compliance driven and mechanistic and inevitably transactional. And so when we think about that, what we were really interested in is how can we get to, if you see the image on the screen, to this bottom part, right, about relationships and identity and stories. Because if we can do the relationship and the identity and the stories, the strategy, the structure, the process is only stronger for it. And so when we're thinking about what the work that we're doing today to share with you is, it really is about deep transformational change, about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and that it can't happen when it's only transactional. And the foundation has to be relational, and it has to be people's stories and their narratives that center the work. And it's stories, not strategies, that have the potential to rehumanize us. And some of this work is really, it is harder and deeper than just simply enacting rules and technical accountability. Those are important, but how do we get to these deeper pieces that help us to really rehumanize us? So the PCCLF's long-year focus as a community of practice has included developing ways of centering relationships in ways that can create deep cultural shifts in how we humanize one another, and then taking it back to our respective spaces of work and community so that we can replicate what we're learning in other spaces. And so here are some of the practices that we've cultivated toward transformative change together. And our process shows you a little bit about how we have worked on inverting the paradigm of how change needs to happen initially. And so we really thought about centering relationships, and a big part of centering relationships was learning how to tell our stories about belonging on Staten Island, tell our stories about inequity on Staten Island, and share them in study circles and story circles, and learn from one another, and allow that process to teach us about the dynamics that maybe we don't see on our own, but because of someone else's story, there's a more complete narrative of what we understand. We did community mapping together, and we did all kinds of fun community mappings together. They're not just community maps that are about, looking at where communities are that are divested and where communities are that are, doing well. We looked at community maps in terms of resources that, give people hope. Where are those resources? So there were community maps that were about not only concrete services, but also about, the things that give people hope and that keep a community animated. And we did a lot of reflection on our identity and our roles and our positionality, and when we're doing the work, where are we coming from? And how does that impact the work? That was a challenging time for us to really assess that and talk about that together and ask one another to hold each other accountable. We have an open source kit that Jenna will also share with you that we have developed over the last year, which has a tremendous amount of resources, but more importantly, it tells the story of our time this year. And we have started to do, for the last couple of months, our How Might We? And our How Might We is our invitation to imagine what we could do together that we cannot do alone. And so how might we create beautiful solutions on Staten Island that could invite others to also join in on these solutions and work together in ways that brings everyone's collective intelligence, resource, and stories to the table. So that's a little snapshot